one of the things that is apparent to me about the Genesis Trust, the work that the executives do, the trustees do, and those of you who are supporters of the Genesis Trust, is it recognizes the reality. This is a sweet, smart city, and there are poor, broken people here. And in amongst the beautiful stonework and the lovely waters and the elegant shopping, people are hungry. And they're homeless. And many are alcoholic. And drugs has invaded and wrecked their minds, and they find their lives turbulent. These are uncomfortable, unspoken realities. People don't like to face that. After all, systems should have dealt with it a very long time ago. And it's necessary to have charities and foundations like the Genesis Trust to bring it not only into the forefront of our minds, but also to give us genuine hope that things can change and be different. One of the most impactful surveys I ever read was conducted by Gallup just over a year ago. And Gallup asked 135,000 people in 135 countries. Now that's a pretty good survey. Most surveys ask 1,000 people and generally come up with the wrong answer. But 135,000 people in 135 countries is a pretty robust survey. And the questions, which there were 6, were to identify whether or not people in the 20,000s, 10s to 15s to 20s felt they had value in their life. You can look it up for yourself, the Gallup survey on purpose. It's fascinating. It reveals one outstandingly uncomfortable statistic. In the whole of the world, only 22% of people believe their lives have a purpose. That's a terrible statistic. If you flip it round the other way, 78% of people don't believe that they do anything worthwhile from 9 to 5, let alone Monday to Friday, let alone January to December. Life passes by. And you might be tempted to think, oh, no, that must be in the dreadful parts of the world. Well, actually, in Europe, the figures are slightly more challenging. It's around 18%, which includes the UK. We're less positive in some of the wealthy parts of the world. Interestingly, the place in the world with the highest positive resonance on purpose is Latin America. It's mainly the Brazilians. As I'm sure we will see with the Olympics coming up shortly, putting aside the political dramas of the last 24 hours in Brasilia, but when the Olympics come up in Rio, you will see a spectacle, not to outdo London, of course, but to show something of the flavor and the zing and the happiness. They do slightly better. They come out at about 35% purposeful. Mark Twain once commented that there were 2 really great days in everyone's life. The day you were born and the day you find out why. And the finding out why is a hugely important question. Why am I here? What am I to do with this bit of body and this creative mind? What am I to do with the energy that runs between my fingers, let alone that goes through my toes, but is more here, in the heart of my mind? What do I do with all of this? Well, the sad thing about that survey is it underlines the fact that if there is one description that sums up the greater majority of people in the wealthier world, and would also be true of people in the poorer world when they move up into middle classness, it is that we become passive. Systems will deal with everything. The local authority will sort it out. The government is always to blame. Your MP is here, so he's definitely to blame. But sorry you took on the seat now, aren't you? But everybody is to blame. Them. Do you ever wondered who they are? They get referred to a lot, don't they? They didn't, they haven't, they wouldn't, they. There's a lot of they. The Genesis Trust says we. We take responsibility. We embrace the broken. One of the uncomfortable words said 700 years before the birth of Christ by the prophet Isaiah was that he would never break a bruised reed. If you saw reeds by a river, and some of them looked a little bit vulnerable, some people might think, oh, that's not very pretty, tidy them up. But the description of Jesus is that he wouldn't break a bruised reed or a wounded spirit, because after all, people can recover. They can get their dignity back. They can stand tall again. They can feel a sense of value and then purpose. There's an Italian philosopher once said that the most difficult thing ever to do in the world, and here is the quote, nothing more difficult ever to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain is to take the lead in introducing a new order of things. Do you know why that is? Because most of us like the comfort of letting it go by. If you ever listen to the end of Radio 4 at night, I bet many of you do. I can see the the ones with sleeping trouble around the I do sometimes. That's sailing by. Yeah, you recognize that? And there is a passive gentility, isn't there, about comfortable lives. I was given a book about a year ago of speeches by... We're coming up to an interesting US election, aren't we? And who knows what is going to happen in November? You could consult your constituency representative here for wisdom. He might have a pearl of insight. But I think the one thing we can all say quite genuinely is don't expect the right answer to come out for sure, if you know what it is. We don't know what's going to happen, do we? We could see a turnaround of turbulence in the American political system that begins to recast whether we live in a committed, more generous world, more open, or begins to divide and corrupt what has become a more progressive way of thinking. Well, in 1967, Robert Kennedy gave a speech in two places, one to university in South Africa and in the same year at Fordham University in the United States. Exactly the same speech. And I found the speech very compelling. And he talks in the speech about what he says are the four great dangers of modern society. Now, if you remember, this is 1967, so the tendency is to think, oh, it's all better since then. But just hear the four dangers and ask yourself whether we might suffer anything of these at all. The first great danger, he says, is the danger of futility, which is the belief that there is nothing that one man or one woman can ever do against the enormous array of the world's ills, against misery, against poverty, against injustice, against ignorance, and against violence. It's all too much. So we feel futile. But all the great changes in the world have come about by fighting individuals, with others gathered around them to support in a call. Archimedes once said, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." How many of us are willing to do that? Step out of the comfort of futility and say, I'll take the challenge on. Kennedy comments that very few of us, he says, have the greatness to bend history itself. But all of us can work to change a very small portion of events, and in the total of all of those acts, of generosity and compassion, history is rewritten. That's how we change history. The second danger, said Kennedy, is that of expediency. That's the people who say that, when it comes to making difficult decisions, you really got to stand by what's going to give you the least hassle. Do the thing that holds the status quo. And keeping the status quo is like keeping up with the Joneses. Decency in society very often is not about getting engaged or involved. It's about letting other people tidy up what's uncomfortable. If we're not to become people of expediency, we've got to become people of compassion with a hand that digs deep into where the pain is most acute. The third danger, he says, is the danger of timidity. Very few people, he says, are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of the wider society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change a world that yields most painfully to change. Aristotle tells us, he says, that at the Olympic Games, it's not the finest and the strongest who are crowned, but those who enter the list. So too in the life of the honourable and the good, it is that they who act rightly win the prize. And then the fourth danger he identifies is comfort. Comfort. For the Prime Minister and the Queen to say what they said was maybe not too difficult for them, but uncomfortable conversations followed. You can speak a truth, but you don't have to say it vindictively. You can say what is factual, but you don't have to say it nastily. There is a Chinese curse that says, "May we live in interesting times." In other words, well, let's hope it all passes by and we can smile differently while we prune the roses. Kennedy sums up his speech like this. All of us, he says, will ultimately be judged, and as the years pass, we will judge ourselves on the effort that we have contributed to building a new world society and the extent to which our ideals and our goals have shaped that effort. When I learned about the Genesis Trust, and I have friends who are involved here in the work of the Trust, when I saw the detail of the accounts, when I read through the activity of the last year and of previous years, these are acts of service that to most go unnoticed. I was here in Bath last weekend. I was here in this wonderful hotel last weekend. You don't see those 4,000 people very easily. There's one thing that often keeps the destitute away. It's called shame. But part of our duty is to reach out a hand of acceptance. And what the Trust does, and that's why this appeal is so important, is to provide an acceptance that then pulls someone up to a place of dignity. And in that dignity, we have broken the mold that says they, and we have said I and we. And with that, I hope you will be willing to say uncomfortable things and do things that get you noticed. Take the shocks and the flack of the criticisms of those who think maybe you shouldn't. Join the fight for the justice of those who are voiceless. stand on the side of the smelly, and help them to discover a place where they can stand with the same contentment that we enjoy. That's the fight of my life, and I hope the fight of yours too. Thank you.